you will appreciate the challenge of someone who went to the Buckeye State in Houston. But equally, by way of sort of nod to Americana, we are mindful that this is almost the final stretch, and this is perhaps the seventh inning stretch for those who are familiar with baseball, given the season starts tomorrow. And Jeff is a big Cubs fan, and they're playing in London in the summer, so we will see him back in London for that occasion. But the substance of his remarks here about higher education, not America's favourite pastime. So without any further ado, and by way of a little guidance, over to you, Jeff.
Thank you. How are you?
Good.
Yeah, so great, wonderful. Yeah, so the seventh inning stretch, we're at that point where people need coffee and Red Bull and other sorts of things. So I'm glad this session is interactive, and my remarks will be brief as a setup to some work that I actually want us to do together today. So let me spend just a few seconds on the title about educational experiences must be designed. So I won't go into much detail, but one of the things that I did back in the US before I came to the University of Leeds was set up a learning design function, an innovation design firm, really internal to a university, focused on learning design. And one of the things, we wrote up some of our experiences in a book called Design for Change in Higher Education. And one of the arguments we make in that book, and one of the arguments we started to make in our practice, was that what we really design when we're doing learning design is an experience. And that is a bit of an expansion. We can talk about that if you want. Not everybody agrees with me. But it's a bit of an expansion of what we typically mean by learning design, which is a bit of an expansion of what we typically or historically meant by instructional design. And it takes design, particularly around learning, into a broader array of educational experiences, not just the module or the course, but the campus, the informal spaces and the formal learning spaces. I think is an appropriate expansion of what it means to design a university experience for students. And I do want to say that out loud because we may get there at some point in our conversation today. So let me move through this a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about design and the reason why certainly during my nearly 30 years in higher education, I've come increasingly to the position that design is a required capacity of a university in order to meet our goals and aspirations and our dreams as educators and meet the expectations of our students. So just briefly, and I also, part of that is also that change is, I've been in higher education long enough to know that my colleagues, including me, maybe at particular moments in my career, pretty impervious to change, but change is no longer an option. It is, I think, a requirement. It's happening to us. And one of the reasons why design has become something that I've gravitated towards is to try to drive that change, try to own that change, and do it in particular sorts of ways. So one of the things that we know, I think, is that the business model for higher education, certainly in the UK, in the US, not sustainable. It is breaking under its own weight. We see that all the time. And so we do need to think differently about universities in order to survive or thrive. So one of the reasons I came to the University of Leeds, I'll mention this briefly, one of the reasons we were able to recruit some of these talented assignments is we have at the University of Leeds as part of a new strategy, and that's a strategy designed, focused on how to have a sustainable and excellent research university for the next 15 years, which is a very hard problem. But I came to the University of Leeds to lead what I understand to be the largest educational transformation effort that I've ever heard of. It's a breathtakingly complex project in which every school at the University of Leeds has been invited, with an asterisk, to rethink how they educate, what we offer our students, how we teach, how we assess. It is comprehensive, and it includes significant online and digital components as well. It's a breathtakingly large project. It is, in my view, a very large design project and has to be approached in that way. So in addition to the challenges that I think we face as academics, there's also pretty significant opportunities out there that can be realized and are there for the taking for the university that wants to engage in the work. Certainly for us at Leeds, we are very serious about engaging the grand challenges education, trying to organize what we offer our students around being relevant partners in solving those grand challenges. And then we have, certainly in my experience in the US, and we have increasingly so in the UK context, and certainly at Leeds, an engaging and eager and increasingly diverse student body. And we have to design our institutions for the students we are going to have in the future, not necessarily the students we have in the past. And then for me, that's an explicit allusion to a very bold student success initiative at the University of Leeds, and our efforts to not only be more accessible, but to make sure that we graduate every student we admit. That is also a really significant design challenge. So why design? So really good book by Joshua Kim and Edward Maloney, if you don't know it, called Learning, Innovation, and the Future of Higher Education. Our book sort of follows up on their book, takes up some of the challenges that they lay down in that book. Even though we only followed them by 2 years, so I think we probably overlapped in a lot of our thinking. They make the argument that learning innovation is as much about leading organizational change as it is about pedagogy and technology. I think they massively overstate the case. It's all about organizational change. And so when I think about design and change in higher education, experience design and learning design, I'm not talking, this is why the expansion is really important, I'm not talking exclusively about what it means to redesign modules or redesign some assessments. Those are important. I am really talking about organizational change. We don't engage people in changing the organization, and some of the things at the more micro level about learning design simply don't happen, or they're unsustainable over time. So the argument that my colleagues and I make, and I want you to, we'll probably come back to this as part of the work that we're going to do together. The argument that we make, we made it at my previous institution, certainly the way we're living this at the University of Leeds, is that in order to facilitate change in an academic institution, in which most of my colleagues think that they work at the University of Leeds and not for the University of Leeds, requires a deeply participatory, inclusive approach to change. So I can't tell anybody to do it. I can't tell Simon to do anything. He says he works for me, doesn't work for me. I can tell him to do something. He doesn't really have to do it. We know this about higher education institutions. I have a role that is an influence role, drives me nuts, right? But that's part of academic culture. And so if we want meaningful, sustainable change in how we do our business educationally, we need to be able to persuade people to do it. We need to be able to facilitate it in a way which is deeply participatory and very inclusive and changes some key variables. If you put the same people in the same rooms using the same processes, you get the same outcomes. And so if we want different outcomes in a way that is sustainable and participatory, the argument that we make, and certainly the way we're trying to live this at the University of Leeds, is that we need to engage people in systemic and meaningful design processes. That's the way to do it. I think I'm right, but I could be wrong. What do we mean by, quickly, what do we mean by design? So it means lots of things. And so fairly conceptual, and then we'll get to work. We talk about designing conversations in our learning design practice. In other words, we design the rooms that we put people in. We design the way we want them to engage with each other. And we guide them along the way. We design a conversation. They make the things, they design the objects that are part of the educational enterprise. So that conversation design has certain components to it. We certainly need to think about how we identify participants in a way that is inclusive and privileges those most impacted by the change we're imagining, often students. So the way we approach design has to include students as fundamental partners and intellectuals in the room. We have to commit to ideation that is attentive to perspective, difference, and turn-taking. We understand how power works, and so we need to be disruptive with regard to typical power dynamics if we're going to do participatory and inclusive design inside a university. We have to do the intellectual work. It's not about writing on Post-it notes, sticking on the wall, and then forgetting about it the next day, right? If we're going to do the work, we have to do the work. So we have to do the analytical work to turn results and insights around to people so that they can prototype and make things. So some of the most interesting design work going on at the University of Leeds right now is on synoptic assessment. And so we're forcing them to prototype and to test, forcing them, persuading them, nudging them, buying them off, paying them. I have an influence job. I'm really good at it. So we're trying to, but we're making them iterate. So it's not a purely abstract enterprise they have to test. And then the commitment to action is fundamental, right? Putting people in a room in which they make things, they commit to things afterwards, we hold them accountable for that. We support them and love them along the way so that we can be successful. So this is the conversation, right? We design conversations as learning designers, and that is really important work. Now you're getting to practice it. So how are we doing on time? Well, I was under 20 minutes, wasn't I? Yeah, I'm always under 20. I don't like to talk a lot. You don't want to hear me. I want you to do some work with me. You're going to design a conversation. How much time do we have for this?
We have till got 22 minutes.
All right, so you have 10 minutes at your tables. Take out your pens. This is my nudging, persuasion, and facilitation. I can't bribe you with food or booze or anything else. I could try to bribe you, but we're going to design a conversation. So I've given you the sticky problem of assessment. And the assessment strategy at the University of Leeds as part of this big transformation project has two components to it: more authentic and digital by default. Those are two of the principles. So the goal, our goal at the University of Leeds, you're all University of Leeds academics right now, is to leverage the importance of the digital to provide students with opportunities to do high-level intellectual work. I'll let you figure out what you think that means. The reality is fundamentally inertia. It's always the reality of universities. They are inert organizations in many respects if we leave them to their own devices. Inertia, activation energy, is my biggest problem. So overcoming inertia, a little physics for you. So no change is our default. Of course it is. We have also a number of academics, and so you now have academic colleagues who understand digital by default as online exams. Not what it means, could mean that. That also, if we want to double down on it, enable rampant cheating. So these are our realities that we have to deal with. The provocation for you is the obvious provocation of the present moment, which is we now have artificial intelligence built into our fundamental production tools that we give our students. Can't ban them. Hopefully you're not at universities contemplating banning them, right? These intelligences are like electricity, I'm convinced. Could be wrong. I'm on the hype cycle right now. We have to confront it. You have to confront it. So I want you to design a conversation around more authentic and digital by default. And here's your discussion process. Here's what you have 10 minutes to do. I want you to design a conversation in the discipline of your choice or the school of your choice. You figure out your tables that enables reluctant colleagues to change assessment practices in ways that are authentic and leverage artificial intelligence. As you think about designing that conversation, I want you to think about who needs to be in the room to have that conversation. Maybe people, obviously people in the school, maybe some people outside of the school. I want you to think about what prior work is required, what preparation needs to happen so that conversation goes well. We never bring people into a room cold. What is the sequence of activities you create to structure this conversation? Like this conversation can take place over 6 months, right? So you think you can play with time a little bit, but what are the sequence of activities that are going to structure this conversation? And then articulate along the way, what are the hardest problems we need to solve to be successful in this design? I've given you an impossible prompt.
Okay, everybody, let's see what we can do in the next 10 minutes, and we'll convene again.
You ready?
I don't know.
So here's the thing about a deadline. You never tell them. You just run out of time. And as threatened, you come into the back of the room first. If I read this table from the front of me, I thought, oh, they're just back there. They're in the back of the room. They're going to and they didn't. All right, so who wants to present? Just briefly. We thought we were on the training. So in my undergraduate speech class, I had a famous professor called Papa Joe O'Rourke, great Irish American, who used to look at me and say, "Young Grabill, stand up and speak with room-filling energy."
So we would think we might be able to have a pre-meeting with them and ask them, why did they not do 15 months already? If we all- Like, we way that we otherwise people have obstacles that won't work as well. Is it more practical, like maybe it takes too much marketing or it's impossible to organize the institutional system? And then we thought we'd go away and think about what we told them. Maybe do some examples with practice. That's part of it.
The two things I think are terribly important, and they might be in the category of the Mr. Obvious joke, but I don't think we always make them obvious, and that is ask people. Starting to do that, some of that initial inquiry is just the people you're working with about where they are intellectually, where they are emotionally, where they are in. And of course, and so the thing about design done well is why haven't really used the phrase design thinking? Design done well is serious intellectual work. So that was never. Okay, who's next? Who wants to jump in? Oh. You can see.
This is my something, but it feels like, okay, you go to that same university to change radically. We know the culture of universities is different. And you think, what can we do to radically change things? Let's have a meeting. Really, you know, it kind of, to me, I'm sorry, but it has this thing of so many advancement projects that sound radical, but are essentially reinforcing the existing culture. If you really wanted to radically change things, this is where you would start with just having another meeting. And in a way, it also, I have to say, it has a sense of what I would call almost like organizational sort of, for lack of a better phrase, constructivism, where it's like, let's have a meeting wherein we pretend that there are no experts, because that makes academic sense. I just wonder if maybe it's more, something more structural, more fundamental. We could do that. Well, like, I mean, you know, look at, for example, establishing parallel philosophy principles. We have to admit there's a lot that we know already before we have the conversation. There's a lot we know about learning, there's a lot we know about good design, but also organizational structural elements. You know, what if we revisited things like promotion structures? What if we revisited promotion structures for professional staff? You know, I had this conversation with Margaret about this, and you know, she was saying like, well, you know, I think that this profit sharing model, open funds, is crazy. You know, she said that, like, it just can't, it doesn't. But and I work for it. I think that one of the measures in design really comes to the top. Is there space for real designers, people who are really looking at design? Who's really fostering them and helping them to grow? Because if you're learning designers, just, you know, level 5 people who have see that, and good luck. So that was good stuff. So we could spend an hour on this because I think you nailed it. You nailed it in a bunch of really important ways. For one, if we're just having, remember what I said, if you have the same people in the same rooms using the same faculty, you will fail. No,
So, so you're right, that is a fundamental challenge. What is different about this? How is this process going to be different? Why could I believe it? Right? You also performed an academic brilliantly, right? Which is to walk into one room, cross your arms, and sit on the chair. That's really important because that's who the audience is for this work. So I'm working right now with a really good service designer at the University of Leeds who's worked with the NHS, who's worked with international organizations, who's worked with lots of different complex organizations, with lots of different really highly expert and professional people. And she said academics are the worst audience you've ever worked with in your entire life, which is true. We're terrible to work with. We're awful because we also all know the answers, right? So one of the biggest threats to really good design work is solutioning. Because you put a bunch of academics in a room and give them a problem, they'll have to solve it in 5 minutes. They know the answers, right? So all of these challenges, all of the structural challenges, all the organizational challenges, all of the challenges around expertise. One of the amazing things about doing design work in higher education. So I worked with the guys a little bit who created the design center for Google Ventures. And they think universities are amazing places because it's primary in their speed, the primary users, the students don't have to, we don't use them very much, right? And all of the expertise you actually need to do the work is also there. You have a campus, an organization with some of the smartest people on the planet, between the students and the academics, and we don't necessarily leverage them. But all of the structural issues, all the organizational issues, yes, they're all on the table, and they all have to be dealt with for this to work. Otherwise, it's just another stupid thing that a deputy vice president of student education maybe do. And we all know that if we fail stupid things, it's 15 years before the organization has the energy to get into the pocket. So the cost of failure is super high. So you have to achieve something. I thought your response was good. Thank you. I know it's great. Who else? Who's going to follow that? Who's going to cross their arms?
I'll bring in my colleague Steve about this. It's interesting you said you were working with somebody who works in health organizations and it's that process of change, how it's managed. And it's interesting you quoted somebody who's written a process of that. And perhaps we need to have something to grab our colleagues' attention, and not just academics, but perhaps everybody. And it was the urgency that you referred to, Steve. And if I give that. With the urgency, is there anybody in this room, a rhetorical question, of course, therefore it needs no answer. Is there anybody who feels that their university is in danger of failing in whatever way we might want to determine failure? Are there any existential threats to us? And is that a way of I was at a meeting yesterday, I won't go into detail, with my institution, where somebody made a statement. And we were in a meeting, in a room around the table, but actually it caught everybody's attention. We thought, wow, that is really a threat. And then somebody else added something in that they knew of another institution, which in management speak, if you look at the death spiral about how organizations change, so there's one period which says it can happen overnight, we've all seen, but there are others where you're on this slow decline and the spiral just goes further and further. And a colleague from another institution felt that their institution was in 5 years into a spiral, death spiral, delayed by the pandemic. And at one level, they're saying typically a longitudinal death spiral can be up to 10 years, and they reckon that they're now 5 years into it, and there's inertia. People are saying, oh, so I don't know, is that something that we need to be drawing people's attention that tomorrow won't always be this thing of today, and it could change radically very quickly?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting challenge in higher education because
the burning platform, right? Do we have a burning, this is why in one of my early slides, I talked about not just problems, but opportunities. I think in higher education, oftentimes you have to start focusing on the opportunities and not the problems, because University of Leeds, we don't have a burning platform. We're fine, right? I don't think we're going to be fine in 15 years. The numbers just don't work, simply don't work. But most academics don't care. They're fine, right? So when I visit schools at the University of Leeds, they look at me quite understandably and say, why would I change? We're fine. Because they kind of are fine. But is fine good enough? Right? So it is a real interesting challenge to why I tend to try not to stay in the problem space and try to think about the opportunity space. And so with some schools, the way in which I engage with them is, wouldn't you like to take an opportunity? I'm going to spend some money with you. Wouldn't you like to take an opportunity to do something really spectacular educationally? Sometimes the answer is no. But just as often the answer is yes, because that's why they're there. And so really try to focus on the opportunity set and the problem set. Because it's rare for large public institutions, what I call a public research university in the US context, equivalent to Leeds. They're not going to let Leeds go out of business. Somebody will save it, and everybody kind of knows that and done. The burning platform, the opportunity set, a really important challenge. I agree. It's a good place to focus. Who has something about how you're going to handle artificial intelligence? You think it's as important as electricity? I have some friends in California who are totally panicked right now.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you like instead of letting it students from that function of teaching, we know that if we do real course, it takes a lot of marking and a lot of time. Can we actually leverage the AI to help us with that marking, with that formative process, so that we actually have a goal in it, which is actually much more meaningful, much more authentic than that summative bit? Can we actually use it as a tool for our benefit, staff, facilitate it, and actually really do stuff we want to do, instead of ridiculous arms race, which some vendors are thinking.
Did anybody go towards formative and away from summative assessment, at least if you were starting to conceptualize it? I know that's getting into the weeds a little bit. Yeah, it was interesting. I was with my peers in the Russell group last Friday. I'm talking about the things that my peers assessment from intelligence. And they talk themselves into this really weird place. I didn't think they were going to go. They talk themselves into this place where let's just leave the machines to do some of the assessment. It's actually a really interesting place. All the human value is informative. And so that's all the value add. That's where the human interaction makes a tremendous difference. And so let's spend our human time and energy on informative and let the machines do some of it. Yeah. And this is the structural issues in how we do education, right? So this is also one of the things I'm learning from the US. In the US, make it. You just build it into the space. That's really what we're doing. So at Leeds, we're pushing very hard on very little summative, more formative. And that is a structural change in how we think about the value system within particular modules and programs. It's a deep change. So nobody went to let's just let the machines do something. I got time for one or two more.
We did talk about program level assessment, which is a model that Alex had.
University, we actually working because actually the core thing here was going back with my academic development hat on, going back to assessment not being one of the things that faculty focuses on really, even when they come course design courses, assessment seems to be one of the things, almost like an afterthought sometimes. So I think really getting them to understand assessment and then to redesign assessment or design even for the first time properly with summative, with formative, nice mix. That's already a challenge, I think, getting people to understand the necessity of that.
And I was saying that it must be a sort of priority at the institutional level. It can't be just us academic designers asking people to come, to our room and we offer them something. There has to be other incentives beyond that. And one of the things we are doing now is that because the university decided that we should do that, they call it programmatic assessment, but we rather call it program level assessment, where basically we get people from each program to sit together, all course coordinators to sit together and redesign their learning path, field trajectories, learning path, and actually talking to each other. And for them, it's so it's an innovation because they never actually sat together and talk to each other. But it had to come also, it couldn't just come from us. We are facilitating it, but it came as a university strategic sort of position.
Thank you. I just want to go back and really reflect on asking us a question about how you want to learn AI. And then you went back and said, get your pen and paper. So I thought is that an answer that what you're trying to tell us that we need to go to pen and paper and massive rooms, people writing some of the examples for like book notes. So I think we went the complete opposite way. Instead of asking the students to think of AI as another machine, I thought, why don't we get whatever example some of these formal assessment doesn't work? Why don't we get the questions that we want to ask in order to understand the students there? And what if we ask the machine to be honest? We ask in fact the students to ask the machine to be honest. And then the students will go and mark whether the machine is right or not. Because the machine all it will do is that it will start taking whatever word we have in the question and we will start finding the next right answer, the next right word from what it started from. So will it ever come up with the right answer? Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. So by asking the students to reflect and say the machine was right, the machine was wrong, then we test whether they understand what we have to teach them, what we have to learn. And then what I guess as teachers we have to do is we have to assess whether that student without reflective answer understands the concept that we want. That's what we repeat the question is we ask. I mean, we don't really care if it's going to be ChatGPT that teaches the answer or down the correlation. But get an answer and tell us is that the right answer or is there something coming. That's
It's a really interesting phenomenon called reverse gaming in the peer feedback literature. And what that suggests is that students learn more from giving feedback and receiving it. Now, we suppose that we teach them a little bit about how to read, right? What to look for, which is also exceptionally valuable. Well, that feedback loop can be virtuous. So we're out of time, I think. It's 1 minute, 2. It would have been one quick observation. I mean, you did what I've done things like this with a little bit more time. Some people, you did the things that I expected you to do, which is great. Along the way, you want to come with something that might be problem. I don't know whether any of your tables stop actually at the issue of who's in the room. I think that's an exceptionally hard problem, right? And you mentioned it when you say if we're bringing in a level 5 learning designer to work with a bunch of kings of the universe and queens of the universe academics, that level 5 learning designer is not going to have much impact, right? Right. That's true. And so it's a really hard problem to think about who needs to be in a room, how they need to be in that room, and over what period of time I need to load different people through that room. So that what comes out of a very different process is actually something that they can do and sustain, because they have the political principle, they have the political authority within that particular program or school to be able to. So if you get that very powerful academic who refuses to be in the room and then comes in the room on the last day and says, I'm not going to. How many people have seen that in their careers? All of them. So that it would have been just enough for you to spend 30 minutes just worrying a lot about who needs to be in that room. It's a really critical issue. Okay, so hopefully this was useful for you, gave you a flavor at least of the intellectual work that we're trying to do at the University of Leeds, how we're planning to nudge, persuade, and move an entire, very large, very complex, very difficult organization in the change curve when the platform is not burning. It's a minutes. So thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you all very much for your participation. Thank you, Jeff, for prompting us and providing qualification. Certainly, plenty is a different format, less of a meeting, more of a coffee occasion, which is where we're going with now. But I'd like to join me in saying thank you again, Jeff.
First of all, a real thanks to Jeff, and I want to present him with the book that we just published. Simon is in the book, and many of the co-authors are not actually physically wrote. And the co-authors are in the room. If people weren't here yesterday, we did launch our book yesterday. And more, we're happy to talk more about it and sign it if you'd like. If you have a lovely exciting afternoon signing or today. But it's a book written by colleagues from the Centre for Online and Distance Education and our collaborators. And it really is dealing with many of the things that we've been talking about the last couple of days. So thank you, Jeff. If you don't mind carrying on the way back to Leeds. Can I just say a fond farewell, if I may indulge myself with this, to my colleagues from Nigeria who came with me with us last Tuesday. We're going to miss you. Because we're not coming back at the end of the day. Once we do the workshops, and then we finish the conference. We don't have the theory at the end. So goodbye to the colleagues from Nigeria. See you soon. It's been lovely having you here. And everybody else, thank you very much. You've been those involved at certainly happens as long as I've had it.